Hi, I'm Dana Balut.
And I'm Hiba Fisher.
And this is El Empire.
It went viral. It was everywhere.
It's very, very foreign to Arab culture to talk about personal things publicly.
12 years before that, I was under the bombs of Beirut.
I didn't go to therapy. I think I should.
This is El Empire. Stories of exceptional Arabs around the world and their journey to the top. Can you just introduce yourself for us?
Sure. I'm going to start by pronouncing my name the way that I pronounce it, which isn't Mona. Yeah, I'm a Mona, which we can get into if it's of any interest to you.
This is Mona Chalabi. Mona is a British Iraqi data journalist and currently the data editor at large at The Guardian. Previously, Mona had a column with the New York Magazine. Personally, my favorite thing about Mona is her Instagram account. It's where a lot of her work is highlighted.
I love how she publishes these really wonderful infographics, and she'll take this super complicated information and then represent it in something that's beautiful and also easy to understand, these illustrations that then you're like, oh, that's what that trend is.
If you don't follow her already, do that now. She co-created a video series called The Vagina Dispatches that was nominated for an Emmy Award and has worked with the likes of Netflix, the BBC, National Geographic, Channel 4, and Vice. So Mona and I called each other. I live in LA, she lives in New York. And as a disclaimer, this episode will acknowledge the existence of male and female genitalia and the existence of sex. All right, let's get started.
My name's Mona Chalabi and I'm a data journalist.
Okay, so just random questions. What food could you eat every single day and never get bored?
Tabbouleh.
No way.
I love tabbouleh. I could live on nothing but tabbouleh, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in London and that's where I grew up most of my life, yeah.
Let's start with where are your parents from?
My parents are Iraqi.
Okay, and they moved to London when?
So they actually met in London. They both moved separately before they knew each other. And I think that my mum moved when she was like 26 and my dad maybe moved in his early 30s.
Since your parents are Iraqi, what was your relationship to Iraq like growing up? Did you have any relationship to the country?
I feel like I didn't really know that I was Iraqi for a long time, which I know will kind of horrify my mother. And I think she'll probably feel like she went wrong somehow. But yeah, I didn't really know that we were Iraqi. I think my parents placed a real emphasis on assimilation. And I also think that Iraq was a place that they never really imagined being able to ever go back to. They didn't renew their Iraqi passports. So it's not that they didn't feel Iraqi. If anything, I'm so shocked, that transition that everyone has from getting to know their parents as purely mum and dad to getting to know them as people in their own right. It's been really surprising to me as an adult to realise how big Iraq is as a part of who they are. But it didn't feel like that was communicated to us growing up. It's weird.
Did you guys ever speak Arabic at home?
Not really, no. And there's a reason for that. So my dad was a paediatrician in quite a deprived part of London. And so many of the kids that he saw were doing really badly in school. And the thinking at the time was that growing up with a second language at home will be detrimental to you in school. And I mean, it's still the case that kids who grow up speaking two languages end up speaking a little bit later on in life. But that was always attributed to some kind of severe developmental delay, and he didn't want that for us. So we went to Arabic school when I was like a little bit older. But that was just so bizarre because Monday to Friday we would go to a Christian school.
Yeah.
And then on Saturday we would be learning Arabic but through the Quran and wearing hijabs. So we'd just show up at Arabic school and quickly put on our hijabs. So I didn't really understand. Yeah.
How would your parents describe you?
Difficult. I would say I was always quite focused. So I would always work hard in school, but was also really disobedient, which was a weird mix. And it was strange because my sister was in some ways the mirror image of me, where she would show up and she was so polite and so sweet to teachers and would never do a single piece of work. Whereas I was rude, but would always like do the work. So I wonder if this was a part of like my dad's training as a pediatrician, or if it was the fact that he grew up with strict parents. I don't know. But we had no rules growing up. We like, there were no rules. So when I went to school, I didn't understand. I didn't understand any of it.
What do you mean by no rules?
All the things that I hear friends talking about, or that I discovered from friends about the limitations that their parents placed, or not even limitations, but the way that they were raised was very foreign to me. So, for example, right, a normal rule that I see a lot of parents doing with their kids, even friends of mine now who have kids, is saying like, you can't have too many sweets or chocolate. We had a cupboard at home and you could eat as many sweets and chocolate as you wanted until you felt physically sick. And I think the belief was just like, you guys will figure it out. And I remember when, again, I feel like my mum will be kind of horrified at me telling some of these stories. But anyway, I remember when it was time for like the school photo. So every single year, a photographer would come to the school and take a picture of you and your sibling if you had a sibling. And I remember the headmistress would bring in a brush just for us. We were like the only kids that looked so feral that she needed to bring in a hairbrush. And it's because like I didn't want my hair to be brushed. So my mum was like, oh, well, whatever, you know, I won't brush your hair then.
That's amazing. I mean, it's so interesting to me because that's quite opposite than the common kind of upbringing, especially amongst Arab parents.
Yeah. No, like I remember calling up my best friends and being like, Cassie, I went and got a tub of paint and painted my mum's room, and I don't know if she's gonna like it. And Cassie was just like, oh my God, you're gonna be in such bad trouble, because she was assuming that my mum would react the same way that her parents would. So she came over and we tried to like clear it up. And her room was completely wrecked, like completely destroyed. And when my mum walked in, she was just like, oh no. But there was never a question of like, you know, being disciplined for that. At the same time, there were definitely expectations that were never really said, but were kind of clear. So I remember my sister saying to my mum, I really, really love art. And my mum was like, you know what's really artistic? Plastic surgery. So I think they always wanted us to go into medicine and to so they were Arab in that respect, you know, like go into law or medicine and anything else is dangerous and precarious and not sensible.
What was your relationship like with your sister?
Growing up, we fought a lot, and I would say that we were trying to figure things out separately in our own ways. And now as adults, we're very close. Yeah. And we've started to talk about our childhood in a way that I think is healthy and that we never really did when we were younger. I feel like I share a lot publicly. I talk a lot about my personal life in ways that make my family very uncomfortable. It's very, very foreign to Arab culture to talk about personal things publicly. I think part of Western culture is to be like, you do whatever makes you feel good. And I think I've done that up to a point. But there also comes a point when I actually just want to respect my family's wishes. And I know that to Westerners listening, it might sound like I'm, I don't know, like passive or weak for doing that. But I'm still trying to figure that out. I think it causes my family members harm, like real pain when I talk publicly about things they don't want me to.
And when you talk about things that you talk about publicly, do you mean like your personal life or your dating life, or maybe like your like illustrations maybe that are a bit more racy than they would want? Is that what you mean?
I think more about my personal life. So I made a 4-part video series called Vagina Dispatches. I mean, I talked about having an orgasm in that, which I guess lays to rest any notions that I'm still a virgin. I made it very clear that I have been sexually active. And yeah, I think that was really upsetting, and our only solace is the hope that maybe family members haven't heard it. That's just like the hope. Yeah. My mum's definitely heard it.
Was there a conversation about it?
Yeah, she was just like, I wish you hadn't. But she's also like, she also knows I'm incredibly stubborn. And all she said was, I wish you hadn't. And it made her sad.
Were you always kind of on the more artistic side growing up? What were you interested in as a kid?
I think I was just interested in success. I know it sounds so weird, but even just as a kid, I was like so focused on just trying to do the thing that would mean that I could be independent, be financially independent, and be able to take care of myself. Because I just felt like life was quite scary and you never knew what was going to happen. And I just wanted to be able to do that. So I was just always so ambitious.
Where do you think you got that ambition from?
I think from my mum. My mum's just like a powerhouse, yeah. Like she, I think she won't mind me saying this, she was taken out of school by her dad, partly because he said that she was taking it too seriously. And so she was out of school for many years. I want to say something like she was taken out of school when she was 6 or 7 and then went back to school when she was maybe 12 or 13. And caught up in all of those years, she just caught up immediately and was just very, very focused on studying medicine, which is something that no one in her family had ever done. And it was all about her gaining her independence and her freedom. And she did it. And I just find she's just so incredible.
Tell me, where did you go to school and what you studied?
So I went to Edinburgh. I started off studying politics, philosophy and economics, and something that I don't talk about very publicly because I still feel kind of weird about it is the fact that I dropped out. So I studied there for 2 years, was absolutely miserable, like just so deeply, deeply unhappy. And then I applied to do a year abroad in France, and I really enjoyed being in France. And so what I did was I dropped out of my degree program and applied for a master's and kind of handed over all of my certificates to the French Secretariat, knowing that they might not necessarily understand exactly what they said. And so I somehow got into this master's program without an undergraduate degree. So I have a master's but no bachelor's.
A quick break from our story today to tell you about another Kerning Cultures Network production, our inaugural show, which is also called Kerning Cultures. In it, we tell stories from the Middle East and its diaspora, like the story about one man's mission to revive specialty coffee in Yemen amidst the current war, or this story about the surprising connection between Lebanon, the country, and a string of small towns in the U.S. with the same name.
I went to South Dakota, Lebanon, South Dakota, and went to the Blanc Ranch Saloon. I sat in and I was talking to her and she said, "Well, where are you from?" And I said, "From Lebanon." And as I said Lebanon, her eyes just lit up. This is where the story gets interesting.
They're the kind of stories that will transport you into other worlds, across the Middle East and the spaces in between. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. That's Kerning Cultures, Kerning with a K. Now let's get back to our story today. When we left off, Mona was telling us about how, by a fluke in the French system, she managed to get a master's degree without a bachelor's degree.
What happened after that? I know you did like a quick stint in Jordan as well.
Yeah, I studied in Jordan, I think it was my first summer while I was at the University of Edinburgh, because I wanted to learn Arabic. I wanted to learn Arabic because I thought it would be great for my career, because I wanted to be able to communicate with family members in a different way. I'd all of a sudden realised as an adult that I only had access to a certain part of my mum, and that constantly speaking in her second language changed things. And I think it was because, so growing up, we had no Arabs around us, which I think is a big part of my weird Arab identity, that the only Arabs that I knew were my parents and my sister. And so when my mum's brother moved to the UK from Iraq, all of a sudden, seeing her speaking in Arabic, I just saw this completely other side to her. And I guess I wanted to access it. So yeah, I decided to go and learn Arabic. Arabic is hard. It's a hard language. And I also felt really frustrated. I was like, no matter how good I get at Arabic, when I speak Arabic, it will always be like, that's a bit unimpressive. You don't speak it perfectly. If I invested this same time and energy into learning Mandarin, people would be like, whoa, you speak Mandarin? That is so incredible. And I think I seek out praise. I think that's part of the reason why I went into journalism. I think a lot of people that work in journalism are a little bit narcissistic. And so it felt really frustrating to me that no one really cared that I was learning Arabic, because it was always just about catching up with what I should have known. I should have always been able to have spoken Arabic fluently. And all of my efforts were just invisible somehow because of the colour of my skin.
When you watched your mom kind of flourish in her native tongue, what was that like? How was she different in English than she was in Arabic?
So the most interesting thing was going to Iraq with her. So it was the first time that she'd been since she left. She hadn't been in maybe 36, 37 years. And when she left Iraq, she was a young woman. And when I watched her go back and I watched her speaking to her brothers, me and my sister were just like, oh my God. She was acting like a young girl. And she was so playful, and she was like teasing people, and she had this lightness to her that it makes me sad. That's not the woman that I knew, because her life has been so difficult. And I think a big part of her life in the English speaking world was difficult, that she was always so serious. Yeah, she never joked around.
Yeah.
She had a really hard life, yeah. Anyway.
What was your first gig, and how did you make your first, I don't know, £100?
My first ever job was working. I used to work in a British, like, what was it? They sold like CDs and sweets and candy. It was a place called Woolworths. And then after that, I worked in a ladies' clothing store called Bling. Yeah, which was interesting. But yeah, that's how I made my first money. I didn't like working in Bling because I felt like I didn't fit in there.
Why not?
So it was interesting. I remember the woman who owned the store kept on pressurizing me into buying some of the clothes to wear them so that I could, like, you know, show off the merchandise. And I remember feeling like, that's not right. But I couldn't really speak up, and I didn't feel comfortable wearing those clothes because I felt like they weren't really for me. I would say that my family aren't exactly white passing, but they're very fair skinned. And I think they always get asked kind of like, where are you from? And that question maybe comes from an assumption that maybe they are from Turkey or from Greece or from somewhere that's like not super offensive. Whereas for me, because I'm dark-skinned, I'm the dark-skinned person by quite a long way, there's no doubt that I'm not a white person, no doubt for a second. And I think that for a long time, I didn't realise that. I went to a school in East London that was so diverse that honestly, like, I know it just sounds like such an awful, awful cliche, but as a young child, I was just not aware of my skin colour. And then experiences like working at Bling, there've been a few really formative experiences for me where I'm like, oh wow, I'm not white. And working in this clothing store where all of the clientele were white, I was just like, oh, like, these clothes aren't for me and I don't really belong here.
Was that the first time that you realized that you weren't white?
No, the first time I realised, I would say, was when my mum took me out of this very deprived state school that we went to, that at the time I think was like maybe the second or third worst primary school in the entire country, and channeled all of her money into putting me into a private school for 2 years. And I walked into this private school and I just knew I didn't belong, and all of those other kids knew that I didn't belong. And I remember someone asking me, are you his sister? And I was like, no, why would you? Oh, he's brown and I'm brown, so you think we're brother and sister? And I was like, whoa. And I experienced a bit of bullying there. I remember a girl telling me to go back home, meaning like to whichever country she assumed that I came from. Yeah, I didn't fit in. I did not fit in at all. And I didn't speak the same as them. I had little like real Cockney accent at the time that I kind of lost. It was really difficult, actually.
And how did you respond to that?
I definitely spent more time alone. I don't really think I had a choice about that. I think I became quite angry. I think, yeah, I was angry about a lot of different things, but I think that made me quite angry. And I just became really focused on like getting out of there. You know, like all the things that I think it still lives with you, all of the things that make you feel less than. My school uniform was secondhand. No one else's was. My school uniform never felt like as clean or as pristine, partly because my mum was like working her ass off. And so she didn't have the time to like iron all of my things. And I just felt less than.
Has that kind of feeling of being an outsider or the only brown person in the room, has that continued throughout your life as an adult?
I think it depends on where I've been. I think my secondary school that I went to, thank God, was very, very diverse, which was great. But it was a very weird experience to me moving to the US because my first job here was working in a very, very, very white space. And I had a similar feeling of just, oh my God, I don't fit in. I remember walking into, we would have these meetings and the head of the organization would have each person walking in, he'd be like, hey man, hey bro, hey man, hey man, hey man. I mean, it was also the masculinity of the place. It was just the feeling that I did not belong. But I think this idea of like Arab identity, are you Arab?
Yeah, I'm Lebanese. Yeah.
Being complicated is, I don't know, maybe people already know that. But like, I feel like my friends, so, okay, I would say that part of the way that race and ethnicity operate in Britain is by the denial of it. So everyone just assumes it's not a big deal. It's not necessarily a big part of who you are. And then we can all get along quite nicely. Or at least that was how it felt 5 years ago when I lived there. And coming over here, being Arab is a word that I'm more and more willing to use. And I feel like some friends back home, I mean, they've even said it, that they find it weird, that I never ever described myself as Arab. And I think some of them might even see it as like me trying to cash in on some, I don't know, positive discrimination or affirmative action or something like that. And I think the idea that your identity changes as you get older and that you can feel one way and then feel a different way. Because I think people understand that it can change depending on the context or the room that you're in. But actually the idea of it evolving with age is something that feels quite bizarre. But it just feels very, very true in my case. I don't know. And that for me, so I mentioned that I didn't know any Arabs. And then when I was like 26, I went to this workshop about the Middle East that was led by this wonderful friend of mine called Tamara Ben Halim. And she became my first ever Arab friend. And it was, I don't know, there was something so joyful in it, in her referencing all of these things that I knew. Whether it was like her talking about the way that her mum cleans her kitchen and how she's so obsessed with hygiene, or her saying all of these Arabic words in the conversation that were still in my household, even though we didn't grow up speaking Arabic. That was so beautiful to discover that.
I know that you said, you wanted to be a journalist because, you were ambitious and you wanted people to hear what you had to say. But what are the other reasons why you got into journalism?
I've always liked telling stories. That was a big part of my childhood. As I said, I went to a church school from Monday to Friday. And so like on Mondays, you would write this weekend diary thing about what you did over the weekend. And I would often talk about hanging out with Jesus. It's like, I found these old books, and I'd just be like, and the teacher's notes are so sweet. They're like, this is really lovely, Mona, but like, let's try to stick to the facts here. I would just say that like me and Jesus went to the duck pond, me and Jesus went ice skating. And I'm sure that if my parents ever had the time to read those books, which they definitely didn't, they too would have been horrified. But I was pretty tight with Jesus back then. But anyway, I really enjoyed writing. I enjoyed the process of writing. And I actually really enjoyed art when I was younger as well. But that's something that kind of fell by the wayside when this idea of being sensible and focused and driven came in. So I didn't draw anything from when I was a young child right up until when I was at 5:38, when I was starting to lose my mind. And I drew as a way of kind of finding calmness and serenity.
Is that the moment that you became this thing called a data journalist?
No, my whole career in journalism has always been in data journalism, which I think is kind of weird nowadays, actually. Most people transition into it. But yeah, my first job was on the data journalism desk at The Guardian.
What about it do you enjoy?
I enjoy the process of kind of finding context. So I enjoy someone telling me a story and me having compassion and empathy and interest in it, but also wanting to understand that bigger picture.
Yeah.
So, if a friend tells me, I don't know, tell me something that happened to you recently, that you wondered if you was alone or if it was a freak occurrence or it made you feel, just something that happened recently.
One of the things I always wonder about that I always wish you would, I'm just going to tell you right now. I wanted to save it, but I might as well just tell you. I always wonder about if there are 3 stalls in a bathroom, which one gets used the most.
Oh, I think about that all the time. Yeah, I keep on meaning to write about that, And I think I even looked for data on it once. Yeah, I've definitely thought about that. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that could totally be answered by data. And what I will also say is that preoccupation, I would say to a certain extent, is quite an Arab thing. This is something that I've only realised as an adult, that part of my obsession with hygiene is Arab. I never realised that was a part of my cultural upbringing, but it is, right?
It is. Yeah, I always wonder which is going to be the cleaner stall. Like the further one is the one people usually in, and then the furthest from the door. But then the first one I feel like maybe most people go into. So is it the middle one? But the middle one always feels like it's dirty. I don't know.
Or is everyone doing the exact same calculation and thinking that the middle one is going to be the cleanest, in which case they're self-sabotaging because that's everyone's calculation and then it's not the cleanest. Anyway, that process of kind of finding the information is really exciting for me. It feels like a bit of a treasure hunt. And what I really enjoy as well is the fact that so often this work has been done. It's been done by other people who are far more qualified than me, who, like, for example, that would have been answered by a behavioural economist somewhere. And the fact of the matter is very often the way that they're writing and publishing their findings is a way that's inaccessible to the general public. And so very often I kind of see my role as being a translator to dig into those studies and take this brilliant work that has been done by someone and try to translate in a way that feels honest and true to the original findings and doesn't compromise their accuracy, but just makes them accessible.
And somehow you've managed to create this niche for yourself. You are telling us the numbers, but in a way that is so amusing and so relatable. And how did that process even happen?
I really think my background is a big part of it. Like I said, I'm a bit of a narcissist. I care about reaching as many people as possible because it makes me feel successful in some way. But also I really care about the people in my life. So like when I come up with a draft illustration, I send it to like 4 or 5 friends who have got nothing to do with journalism, nothing to do with writing or the media. And I ask them if it makes sense to them. And very often they're like, no, like this does not make sense. This isn't good. And that's such crucial feedback to me because if it doesn't make sense to them, then I don't want to publish it. So I think, that like informs a big part of what I do.
Can you then walk me through the process from the very beginning to the very end of how you create a particular illustration, a graphic?
Yeah, let me try and come up with one. Can you think of one that you would like to know that process for that you might have seen?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is just the curvature of the penis, but maybe that's not the best one. Maybe that's not the best one to do. We can do the flood levels, the Donald Trump and the flood levels.
Okay, the curvature of the penis one, the research idea started from one very sad evening, as you can imagine. And then being like, I wonder how many more men suffer from this. So anyway, let's shelve that one. this was which hurricane was it where Trump like stood up on top of a truck and like started throwing toilet roll out into the crowds?
Oh my God. Jeez.
Yeah, just so awful, so awful. Anyway, I wanted to contextualize for people just how extreme this flooding was, because the problem is that on the one hand, numbers feel like such an exciting language to me because this, like, as digits, they are accessible. They traverse cultures and countries, and they're so accessible. My Arab parents use the same digits that I do, but they're also not, because the problem is that when you hear a number like 3,564, what does that even mean? Is that a lot? Is it a little? Every single time I hear something about billionaires, I have no frame of reference for understanding that amount. And the same thing goes with floods. Like every single time they talk about how many inches there are, it's very difficult for me to actually visualize that. And so for this one, I wanted to contextualize that flood damage in relationship to previous very bad floods in the US. But I also wanted to show those measures with something that feels tangible and relatable. And so I used an image of Trump. I think this was an image of him just before he started to throw out those toilet rolls. And because he's 6'2", and people, I think, generally have a sense that he's not necessarily a short guy, I just showed the floodwaters in relationship to him. So it's just an illustration of him with the floodwaters of various recent hurricanes drawn against him. And you can see that I think it comes up to like his chest or something, or maybe his waist, the most recent flood. Yeah. I see something that's happening in the news. I feel like maybe people who are looking at it have a set of questions. Maybe they're asking themselves, is this really something new? Maybe they're asking themselves, who does this affect? Does it affect men more than women? Does it affect one particular racial group, one particular age group? And so numbers can help me to do that. So I literally just start researching. My go-to sources are very often government numbers, which people sometimes think of as being quite unreliable and quite skeptical, but they remain one of the best sources that we have. And they are, by and large, incredibly impartial, depending on which country you're looking at and which data set. Anyway, so I look at government numbers, I look at Google Scholar, I look for academic pieces, I look at numbers that are published by NGOs. And then what I very often do is I will get those numbers and do them into a very classic chart type. So I'll literally be sitting in Excel or even Google spreadsheets sometimes, and I will just look through the different chart types. I'll take that same data set and look at it as a bar chart, a pie chart, a line chart, and I'll see which of those feels like it communicates the data the best. And then I think about the subject that I'm talking about here. If I'm talking about men in tech, can I show these bars as penises? If I'm talking about pantyhose sales, can I draw this as like a line chart, which is actually just a woman's leg that's kind of bent and extended? And it's really important to me that the subject is inherent in that visual. I think that means that the visual itself is more memorable because you saw a chart about flooding that looks like a flood. But I also think it sometimes has an emotional power that I think should be inherent in data journalism. I think some people, like a lot of people, aspire to this idea that they are producing perfectly objective work that has some kind of moral purity because of it, and that's just not the case. Like, these numbers have an emotional weight to them, and I want to be honest about that. And I also want to be honest about the fact that I, as a person, have made decisions when I was looking at that data set about what it was that I wanted to show, and that my own biases as a human affected my understanding of where the story was. And I think that by creating hand-drawn illustrations, you don't forget that it was a human that made those decisions.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up this topic of bias, and I know that you've spoken about this before, but maybe you could tell me a little bit more about this inherent trust that people have in you and in journalism, and what are the dangers and what are the beauties about it, about that trust?
Yeah, it's an enormous responsibility, and I hope that people don't trust me too much. Like, the skepticism that people have, to me, is so healthy. But I do think that there's something about data journalism and maths in particular that can make a certain questioning part of people's brains switch off. And that comes, I would say, from a place of fear. So most people have a fearful relationship with mathematics. They have a fearful relationship with finances. It's something that they think they are somehow not capable of, they're not good at it, they want to leave it to other people to do. And I don't want people to feel that way. I think that's really dangerous, because the consequence of that very often is that people look at a chart and they assume that it was created by someone who's smarter than them, and just kind of like not question it. There feels to be like a truth that is impenetrable, or it's difficult to dismantle a chart and to ask the right questions to figure out the truth in it. And I really love my Instagram comments. People call me out all the time. They ask brilliant questions about like about the composition of that image and how it was created. And I think all of those questions continually make me better at what I do.
Yeah. How do you know that you're done with an illustration? What's the moment that you decide to post it or publish it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like sometimes I'm done when my deadline comes and I just kind of have to send it off. But I feel like very often I'm done when... So I recently posted an animation about women in the arts. And actually, I finished that 3 weeks ago, and I spent another 2 weeks continually changing it. And I knew that I was done when I looked back at the earlier draft and I could see how much how much better it was than these later changes that I was making. And that there was a purity and a simplicity to that earlier draft. And so when I can compare and contrast various drafts and see that the earlier one was much better, that's kind of an indication to me that I was done.
From what I see on your Instagram or any kind of, you dress really colorfully and really stylishly. Is there a relationship between your illustrations and also the way you present yourself?
Wow. That's very, very kind. I really don't think of myself as doing that. I would say actually the way that I dress has a lot more to do with my ethnicity than anything else. You know, most of my extended family are incredibly religious, and they spend a lot of their time in black abayas. And when they grieve, they wear black for a year. And so black to me is a very, very... It's just a very heavy colour, and I try to avoid wearing black as much as possible. After we lost someone, I tried to wear black for a while, to just for a little while, I think, just to try and respect it. But it was just so hard, the weight of it. Yeah.
What are some of the things that you love in life besides your work?
So my work is a really, really, really big part of my life, and I feel very privileged that it's something that I enjoy. And my friends are a really, really big part of my life. I think this is partly the result of having been single for so many years of my adult life, that my friends figure so heavily. And I think it's really beautiful and wonderful. Yeah, my friends are a really, really big part of my life. It's funny, I literally just got a new therapist, and she was like, describe yourself. And I was like, I love my friends and I love my work. And she was like, is that it? I was like, I think that's it. That's kind of all I've got. I don't know. I don't know what else. I've started to exercise for the first time in my life recently, and that feels quite good. Although I'm quite upset about the fact that I have lost my arse. I had a big Arab arse, and I'm sad that I'm losing it. But I know that I should focus more on being fit and healthy. But yeah, anyway.
You can get it back.
I'm sure I can, yeah. Just a week in Iraq and it will be back in a second.
Yeah, exactly. You are a little bit of like a celebrity in the nerd, geek, journo world, which I love. You're like a famous person for nerds, which is like one of my life goals. Anyway, I wanted to ask, do you ever get stopped in the street? Do people recognize you?
Occasionally, and I really don't like it. I really, really don't like it. Like, it's sweet. Like, the people who follow my work, like, I'm not actually famous, and I'm not actually like... I don't think people like, I don't know. They it's so nice. They just want to stop me to be like, hi, I just wanted to say I like what you do. And it's so beautiful, but I really hate it because I feel so, part of the reason why I love living in cities is because I really want to be invisible. I really, really want to be invisible. And that feeling of like someone coming up to you, I don't know. Like, I remember I was eating dinner by myself at this bar, and like, I don't know, maybe I had like food around my mouth. I was on the phone at one point, and God knows what I was saying to my friend while I was on the phone. like personal stuff. And then the person next to me was like, oh, I just wanted to say, like, I know who you are and like I'm a big fan. And I was like, but then what did you just hear me say? You know?
This is a really dark question, and I'm sorry, but what would you want the first two lines of your obituary to say?
Oh, wow. A good friend. She was a good friend. And she was a good person. Is that? I don't know. She was a good person. I only wanted to say one thing. She was a good person. That's it.
If you're looking for more of Mona, follow her on Instagram and Twitter at Mona Chalabi. That's Mona, Chalabi. Seriously, do it. You can thank us later. She's also happy to answer any questions you might have, so get in touch at monachalabi.com. And this episode was produced by Dana Balut and myself, Hiba Fisher, with editorial support by Lena Mohammed and Alex Atack. Sound design by Mohammed Khezat and fact-checking by Zainab Duwaider. Our original sting was composed by Ramzi Bashur, and El Empire is produced by the Kerning Cultures Network. A huge thank you, of course, to Mona for giving us her time for this interview. All of our guests on El Empire are extremely busy people, and so it means a lot to us that they trusted us with their time. Thank you, Mona. And next week on El Empire...
I just woke up one morning and I remember very clearly, I looked in the mirror and I said, do you want to live or do you want to die? And I looked in the mirror that day, I remember it really clearly, and I said, I want to live. And I never looked back. And then from that day forward, I made a conscious decision to really look at myself and understand what I had to offer the world, and to live in authenticity and no fear.
That's in 1 week. Lastly, if you're liking El Empire, please subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. Also, leave a rating and review on whatever podcast app you're listening to us from. It actually helps boost our rankings so that other listeners can find out about us in the podcast libraries. Thanks for listening.